So we want to welcome everybody this morning. Today we are going to be talking about providing some answers to vaccination questions that we get when we teach vaccination courses that we are hired to teach. So we both get contracted to speak and educate with different companies on multiple, topics as it pertains to human resources. Most recently, the one that I've been repeating a lot lately is the vaccination one. So we want to make sure that, we share some updated information and what we're running into, because it's very likely that you guys are running into the same thing. And when luck have it, but the moment that I need to probably sign for a package with the Postal Service, I will not be able to do so. And that's okay.
That's how life works,
I
right?
know, it's funny, right? All right. So, we certainly invite you guys to go ahead, raise your hands, come on up. We're recording this just so we're not capturing you folks, we are only capturing us. And this is actually, if you wanted to catch this on a repeat, you can actually find it on the Real HR Show YouTube channel. And this week, I'm actually going to include this as an episode in my podcast called Best Practices in Human Resources. So with that being said, let's have at it. All right, first question.
Let's have at it.
Are you ready?
I am ready.
Okay, good. I am excited. This is going to be good. All right, first question. This actually came out, we talked about the two exemptions that, per our legal infrastructure, you have to provide carve-outs for, which are exemptions under ADA and exemptions under religion, okay, for Title VII Civil Rights Act. So this question stated, I see you did not say medical exclusion. Does this need to be more defined? Should we require accompanying medical waivers with the ADA forms? So there is no such thing as a medical exclusion. There is only if a physician is coming out and stating that the person has a disability, or this is something that they should not take the vaccination because it would impact them physically, then it actually would be covered likely under the American with Disabilities Act.
Right. And so there isn't like a special thing you need to do. You hand them the ADA paperwork. And this is the magic of the medical exemption, is that you don't make the decision whether their medical case is valid or not. Their doctor makes that decision. And so the doctor either fills it out and says, yeah, this person can't have the vaccine, or he doesn't. And you don't have to sit and say, well, you're saying it's because you have allergies, but are these too bad? Blah, blah. That's not your decision. Now, of course, you go through the interactive process with them afterwards to come up with a reasonable solution, but you send them to their doctor to fill it out.
Yep. And what happens more often than not, and I apologize for the barking dog, he always has something to say about this stuff. But what happens more than not is that an employee will say that, like, I can't do it for medical reasons. And all of a sudden what happens is that people who don't understand how American with Disabilities works, they all of a sudden do this. They like totally freeze up and they just kind of like, they just don't do anything because they don't want to violate laws, or they don't want to, get themselves into trouble. And the honest piece of it is that just because somebody plays that medical card, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have no room to execute some form of discipline. You can't, uphold to your policies. That's not it. It's just when you get that freeze, that's the time to ask questions.
Right. And just remember, it's just like if someone says, my back hurts, so I need a standing desk. You don't evaluate how much their back hurts. You say, oh, I'm sorry, here's the paperwork. Go see your doctor. Although, to be fair, if someone says, my back hurts, can I have a standing desk? I would say yes, because a standing desk is a really cheap accommodation. But legally, you don't have to do that unless their doctor signs off on it. It for some reason, the vaccine sends people into a panic it doesn't need to. You just treat it like you would a sore back or a sprained ankle, or I have a heart condition and I need a closed parking space. Thank you for telling me. Here's the paperwork. When you bring it back, we'll go through the interactive process and we'll find a solution. And what you'll find is a lot of the medical excuses will fall away when this happens, because people declare themselves medically unable, but they haven't actually spoken with their doctor. And I advocate for everyone to speak with their doctor if they have any concerns. I have a kid with a bunch of health problems. And so before she got her vaccine, I called her doctor and said, what do you think? You know, because that's what you do. I didn't call HR, which would have been me, but I didn't call myself and say, what do you think?
You didn't call yourself?
I didn't call myself. I did call myself. But I didn't go on Twitter and say, what do you guys think? Here are her symptoms. Should she get it? I went to her doctor who's done all the blood tests and all of that. That's what you need to tell your employees to do. Here's the paperwork. Go see your doctor. When you have it done, then come back to me.
Yep. It's a viable,
and most of it will fall away.
It's a viable medical resolution. So, and by the way, when you do give somebody paperwork to go to their physician to do this, give them a 2-week time limit, because you're going to find out real quick how fast this is actually real and when it's not, when there's an expiration date. So, and it works for you.
This is very, very wise. Brenda is wise. She's good for this one.
Thank you. Okay, next question. And this is regarding disability. If an employee does not want to disclose the nature of the disability, just notify us that there is one. Does that trigger a protection or not? You want to kick this one off?
I mean, I would do the same thing with, okay, here's the paperwork. Go to your doctor. I mean, what am I supposed to do with that? Hey, Brenda, I have a disability, and so I need to take a 2-hour lunch. I mean, like, I need a standing desk and I can't be vaccinated, but I'm not going to tell you what my disability is.
Yeah, it doesn't work.
It doesn't
work. So, right. So, because I've had this. I've had somebody come in and it's like, well, I can't do this because I have a disability. And it's like, okay, so when somebody opens that door, you can step through it and ask the question. So can you help me understand the nature of your disability? That's the best question that you could possibly ask. What is the nature of your disability? Only if they step through that door or if they open the door.
Right.
I can see your
well, there is something, if you notice something, you can't approach someone. You just want to do it carefully.
Right.
I mean, it's not like you have to wait for the person in the wheelchair to come and ask you for an accommodation of, you know, elevator privileges or something, you know.
Right. But that's slightly different than the question though.
But yeah, if someone's not willing to disclose, you're not going to go up to someone and say anything like that. But if they come to you, no, I can't give you an accommodation if I don't know what it is, because the ADA paperwork isn't just, yes, this person has a disability or no, they don't. It also will have the doctor say, here's the restrictions. So, you know, this person cannot sit for more than 45 minutes at a time. Right. Or this person can only carry 25 pounds, or this person can only walk 50 meters at a time. Therefore, they need a close parking spot, or whatever that is. The doctor fills it out, and then you go through the interactive process. You don't have the interactive process before.
Right. So I'm going to take a step back and into the question itself again, because a lot of these things I've run into personally in my career. So if somebody comes up and says, listen, I have a disability and I can't do X, and you ask the question, what's the nature of the disability? They don't really have to tell you exactly what's wrong with them. They can say something along the lines like, well, you know, this in this case is that I have a long-standing diagnosis of cancer, for instance. They can say that. But they don't have to tell you where it is or what their, you know, cancerous history is. All they have to say is that, yeah, this could negatively impact my treatment of cancer. which is actually a disability as recognized under the ADA. You're like, okay, great. Tell you what, here's what we need to do. We'll need to learn a little bit more about this. We don't need to know your specifically. You like how I did that? And please do me a favor, take this documentation to your physician. We'll give you 2 weeks, have your physician complete it for us, bring it back, and then we'll review it together. And that way we can sit down and get a better understanding of what your needs are. And when you approach it that way, employees tend to be very responsive to that, because you're still acknowledging there's a level of privacy and dignity there for something that could be, who would want to tell you that that they have breast cancer or ovarian cancer or testicular cancer or prostate? I mean, that can be very personal. And they go through this whole process of literally having their physical body exposed to so many people that it's nice to know that their employer hasn't been down that road with them.
Right, right. And it also gives something to an employee that most often they haven't gone through this before. They don't know what to expect. They don't even know what their own limitations may be. Okay, if I have a long-standing cancer diagnosis, then they've probably been through it. But if I was just diagnosed with cancer yesterday, they don't know what they're going to need. But their doctor has already dealt with 100 people or more that have had this same situation and are in jobs of similar, demanding physically or mentally or whatever, and can give them the ideas and can say, this is what the limitations are going to be so that we can make this plan.
Right.
And, as far as we're talking, directly with vaccines, so someone says, I have a disability, I can't get vaccinated. Okay, thank you for sharing, but I'm going to need you to have your physician document for me. And be compassionate, be nice, but the medical diagnoses and what the limitations are need to be on the head of the physician.
Yep.
And not on the head of HR.
Or the employee. The employee employee really isn't the one lawfully that actually makes the accommodation or determines the accommodation. It's the physician.
Yes, it's the physician. And so, there's often many ways to reach an accommodation based on the physician guidelines. But it's the physician that makes that. And then we go through that interactive process to try to find the best thing that will work for both you and your employee, for both the business and the employee.
All right. So you ready for another good question? This is a little bit of a long-winded one.
Okay.
You ready? All right. This one person sent this to me. It says, I have a question on the disabilities and accommodation process. An employee is requesting to work from home because she was part of an organ transplant and needs to stay home or care for the patient as well as herself. And she is considered immune compromised along with the patient. Her position requires her to be in the office a full-time 40-hour position, and she's only working an average of 32 hours a pay period. She's been working remotely since 2020. This person who asked the question said she came into the business in 21. To clarify, she is not wanting to come into the office due to the concern over COVID and doesn't want to put herself or the other transplant patient at risk. All right, so when I answered this, there was a little bit of some confusion when she said it was part of the transplant. It wasn't clear if she was the donor or not. That never really came forward. So how I addressed it is that if she was the donor and the donor is actually helping to take care of the person who received her organ, then more than likely they can probably get some form of exemption. But again, it has to be, or protection, it has to be, done all through the physician. But before I actually I read it initially very quickly because these things tend to go really fast. It wasn't clear to me that she actually was in fact the donor. It was an assumption, and I had to answer the question in 2 ways. Then I came back and said, if this person isn't the donor and being a part of the transplant means that this individual was caring for somebody else and that somebody else wasn't a direct family member, either a spouse, child, parent, anything that would qualify on our FMLA, there were no protections for that person. So I said, if that's the case, then focus in on what the aspect of a compromised immunity system. That's the only thing that the HR person would be able to really work with. Not and if it wasn't the donor, and it was, if it was just like a, this person coming in and taking care of their best friend, there's no protection for that.
Right, right. And if they are a family member, and they qualify for FMLA and they're doing that taking care of, then that qualifies. But yes, just being a friend to someone doesn't. That doesn't mean that the
Right.
company can't show compassion and can't
Right.
work with them, but it's the question of legal protection.
Correct.
And I wasn't quite clear, they have to be in the office, but they have been working from home, or because if they have been working from home, yanking that back now when they have a reason seems unnecessarily cruel, even if it were legal to do so. And this is something that many companies get this bee in their bonnet of, we're all coming back to the office, and that means you have to come back no matter what. And legally, if there's no ADA reason for them to stay home, yeah, you can do that. But there's this thing going on called a labor shortage, and it's combined with also known as the Great Resignation. And
we love our titles.
Those two things together mean that you probably want to be a little bit more flexible with employees and accommodations right now, because you're a good person, not because you won't be able to replace them.
Right. And
but you won't be able to.
Yeah. And in all fairness, there is a love, companies are trying to get things back to, quote unquote, back to the norm, right? They're trying, because there is a cost to having your employees away from one another. Teams don't, they're not as bonded. They're not, so that's understandable. In all aspects around here, this is a 360 degree. You can pretty much understand everybody's positioning here. It's just a matter of really just kind of working through and finding out what is the absolute best solution to where you're meeting all of the company objectives, or all the objectives, or as many as you possibly can. And this is just one of those things where it's just taking people through the steps. You just have to play it by the numbers.
You do. And it's important to always go through that step, because if somebody comes in and gives you that question and nothing was clear on that question was not a clear question, and so you answer it without getting clarification, it could be the wrong answer. And the person goes away thinking that they were clear because they know what's going on. Because they're like, I'm the one that's donating my kidney. But you read that as, I'm taking care of a friend. And you're like, there's no protection for you. Yes, if you have been sawed open and your kidney removed, that actually qualifies for FMLA. So yay. But it's always important to speak and to get clarity around what they're asking. And people aren't good at clarity in medical things.
And in general.
And it's
let's just knock that argument right out right now. In general, people suck at communicating.
In general, yes.
Let's just call it what it is.
Suck at communicating. Yes, but especially around medical things, and especially around new medical things.
Right.
Like, you can I can discuss my chronic knee pain with no problem, because I've been having it for like 10 years. I can tell you when it flares up and what I need, blah, 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 which the answer is what I need is ibuprofen. But anyway, it's not a big deal. But I can talk about that because it's new, and I mean, it's old, but something new happens. Man, people they're a mess because it's emotional too.
It is.
It's emotional.
It is. Okay, so moving on. We got a couple of really good juicy questions here. All right, so we have been mandated to require the vaccine. How should we be filing the proof of vaccination? Well, you know what? You're going to want to, this should actually be part of your process in defining your policies. And I'm going to keep this one short, so that we can finish covering all the other ones. I'm actually in the process of working with a company right now. I'm going to be meeting with them. If you would like to, link up with me, or just watch not my Facebook page, but watch my webpage at brendathehrlady.com. It is very likely that I'm going to be doing some work with them. And this is an actual mobile solution that employers can access on the web. And it is specific to vaccination tracking. So if you just keep an eye out or join my list at brendathehrlady.com, I will be sending out some more information, because I've actually been shopping for this for one of my clients. And then that way, documentation can be fed in a cloud base directly from the employee. Not only includes their vaccination information, and it's all HIPAA protected, especially for companies that aren't set up for this stuff. It also would include if somebody were being diagnosed or going to the physician with suspicion of COVID or active treatment of COVID, then the employee can actually upload that all the documentation directly to that particular cloud for that client. So stay tuned on that one.
Yes, that sounds like an excellent thing.
Yeah. Okay. So next question: how will affected unemployment benefits? How will affect? No, I love it when people they ask fast questions in a slower moving environment. Okay. How will affect unemployment benefits if the employee declines the vaccination, is then terminated? Will they be eligible? Anybody can apply for unemployment. Remember, I said apply. Didn't mean that they're going to get.
And anybody
approved.
can appeal if
Right.
they are denied.
Right.
But most states are saying no. I suspect that there are some states that will say yes. If I had to guess, I would say Montana, because they were pretty vocal about not allowing mandatory vaccinations, but then the federal government came in. So I would expect in Montana, you might be able to get unemployment. Other states that I guess would be Texas and Florida. But if you're in Oregon or New Jersey, no.
Yeah. And with the
apply.
Right.
Apply. Yeah. Always apply. I mean, even if you get fired for like stealing, this is HR people hate it when I say this, but go ahead and apply. The worst thing that will happen is that they'll say no. And if I'm the HR person, you're going to have to do something really bad for me to say no, because I just want you to go away, and giving you unemployment makes you go away.
It does. And not to mention, and here's something else too, right? So we're about helping the companies in these episodes. But, the thing is that, if you have an employee that you suspect could possibly, make problems for your company, whether they have a position or not. I mean, they may think they do, and your documentation, all your practices, pretty much line up that they don't. That's still a lot of money for somebody to file a complaint against your organization, and a lot of your time. So you know what? Don't, unless there's something super egregious, like they assaulted an employee, they threatened an employee, they threatened a member.
That too.
Yeah, or stole a significant, amount of money or assets from your company. You know what? Let them have it, because they feel like they've won something, and they, like Suzanne said, will go away. So more than likely they will, because it goes back to the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. They're at level 2, and that is making sure that they have money coming in so that they can put food on the table and feel safe and secure.
And that is something that's really important. And as Brenda said, this isn't just the pro-employee view, it's a pro-business view, because it does make things easier for your business. So companies that like search for ways to stop unemployment, like trying to forge resignations, I'm like, oh my gosh, you guys, it's not that expensive. And if you're terming a lot of people, then maybe you need to check on either your hiring practices or your management practices, because you're the problem. But absolutely, if you get terminated for refusing the vaccine, go ahead and apply for unemployment. You probably won't get it, but it doesn't take that much time to apply, and you can always appeal if you are denied. So you do get 2 bites at the apple.
Yeah. I mean, basically the employer would say, nope, they broke policy. So, all right. Okay, if I interviewed employees resistant to the vaccination earlier in the pandemic, and they specifically told me they did not have a religious or medical reason, then they later claim one, am I as the employee justified in saying, or I think it's employer, am I
Yeah.
as the employer justified in saying that it is not a bona fide exception? So,
I would.
well,
But
here's
I would
the
also
thing.
call in my lawyer.
Yeah, as first off, yeah, definitely set up a legal strategy on this one. But here's the thing: if somebody comes in, look, you know what? People find faith in difficult times. They find faith in good, positive times. Just because somebody came in and interviewed with the company didn't have a reason, a sincere religious belief. That is a legal defined term. Sincere religious belief when they first started with the organization doesn't mean they didn't find a faith between the time that they started early in the pandemic. Because let's face it, there are people that have been trying to find solace throughout this whole thing. Could they have found faith? Yes, absolutely, they could have. And then later on come back and say, hey, listen, now I have a sincere religious belief. If they have a sincere religious belief, those protections carve out. Now, I'm not going to tell you which religious beliefs those are because that's really a conversation between you and your attorney, your employment attorney. And don't go to general counsel on this, go to an employment attorney.
Yes, very, very, very important. Go to your employment attorney. But you're right to be skeptical.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
And, this is something that I always say, I do a lot of work with schools and rules around that. And this is something that comes up when it's a particular teacher's turn to chaperone the prom, and suddenly they are a devout member of whatever religion prevents them from working on Friday night or Saturday night. And you're like, no, you've never been a practicing Jew before. You've never been home before sundown before. And they're like, yeah, but I can't do it because it's prom chaperoning. Like, no, that's not how that works. So, that usually falls apart pretty quickly.
Yeah.
But nice try. But before you take any adverse action against someone that's claiming a religious exemption, even if you think they are lying through their teeth,
Yep.
please consult with your employment attorney just to get your I's dotted and your T's crossed, because a $250 consultation with the employment attorney could save you $100,000 in a lawsuit.
Yep.
Yep.
Exactly. And religious exemption is nothing to mess with in the courts. Just
No.
ask Abercrombie and Fitch.
Yes, and New York, a New York judge just struck down a mandatory vaccine policy yesterday or 2 days ago, because it didn't contain a religious exemption. So that was this week. I think it was Tuesday.
Yep.
And New York isn't, exactly the hotbed of evangelical Christendom or whatever. It's New York. And I used to live in New York, so I can say that. But they went ahead and struck it down because it lacked that religious exemption. You're going to lose everywhere if you don't have a religious exemption. Every state.
Yep.
That's federal law.
Yep. It's so woven into our case law. You can't, there's no way to get around it. It's too deep.
No. And they don't need like a letter from their priest or something. It's their personal belief.
Yep.
So they don't have to bring like, here is my book of scripture that says, thus verily saith the Lord, no vaccines. It's their personal belief that matters, which is why it can be so sticky,
Yeah.
Because how am I supposed to tell what Brenda's sincere religious belief is and what my sincere religious belief is? I mean, how do you tell? So some things are easier than others to tell, because there are some things that churches do come out and say vocally. But vaccines, all your major religions in the US have been pro-vaccine. That doesn't mean that minor churches have not been,
Right.
but the big ones have all been like, go get vaccinated.
Yeah. There are a couple exceptions. And then I have to tell you this. I didn't copy the question down, but I thought it was hilarious. It was on another window and I just didn't grab it. So first off, religious organizations such as Jehovah's Witness, Christian Scientists, Amish, Mennonites, they actually have very specific guidelines around medical treatment. So for instance, and I know this on the Jehovah's Witness side specifically because my aunt and uncle are Jehovah's Witnesses out in Hawaii, and they do not permit blood transfusions. Once the religion has been actually disclosed, then transfusions are not permitted. That is a religious practice. And so, yeah. So, I mean, that's if somebody gets into a car wreck and part of the emergency treatment is that they are getting a transfusion because they lost 2 quarts, or 2 pints and, or quarts or whatever. How many we have? Like, what is it? 6 pints or 6 quarts? Anyway, they lost 2, whatever
they lost a lot.
Right. They lost 2, right? So they're, I don't know, Mike's like, I'm losing it today. So they get it as part of the medical treatment in the emergency room with no knowledge of what this person believes or doesn't believe. And it's a sincere effort to save the person. As soon as the family comes in and says, you need to stop all transfusions because they are Jehovah's Witness and we don't permit it, the hospital has to respect that unless the hospital is willing to go to court because that person's life is like on the ledge, right? So it'll get really complicated, but that's neither here nor there. The comment that actually came out was hilarious. One person wrote in and says, well, my employee says that they have a religious belief against this, or they religiously believe against this. And I said, yeah, that's not going to cut it. So it's like, I just loved the spin on it, but that's not how it works. Okay. Here we go. that was very creative. I said, no, they religiously believe against this. I'm like, yeah, that's not the same thing. All right. So next question came in. When do you think the executive order will be issued? Well, the order has been issued. The next step is actually waiting for the Department of Labor to actually come up with steps forward. Now, the next part of that question was, where is the best place to get updated information on the mandates and how it affects a company of 100 employees or more? That's going to come out on the Department of Labor. However, Arizona has been, I believe, the first state
Arizona's the first state
to actually file a lawsuit against the federal government on this executive order. Now, an executive order carries the weight of the law, but it is not, in fact, a law, which means that a judge at the federal level can stymie it, and it can actually proceed quicker into the Supreme Court as a result of that. So, yeah, buckle up. It's going to get interesting. I honestly I think we believe we're in consensus on this. This is not going to happen.
It's not going to happen, but it will happen for the federal employees and for federal contractors, because that's different than private businesses. And the president has much more authority over those people than he does over your private business that doesn't have dealings with the federal government. So while we're saying, and I don't think this is going to come up, the latest that I've heard is for federal contractors, they're looking at a date in November for this to go into effect, which gives you adequate time to receive both shots. But for the rest of us, that's not going to happen. And it's possible that the executive order will fail too, because there weren't some exceptions put in there for the federal employees. There's no exception for remote workers, which it's really hard to argue that there is a safety concern if I'm sitting at home by myself.
Yeah, it's too broad. And right now, federal contractors specifically must get the vaccination if their employees are on federal property. However, it does not include employees that work from home. So or even employees who are working OCONUS, which stands for outside of the continental United States. There's a little contractor slang going on right there. But but even, even people who are working OCONUS, they're likely going to be on federal property. But so, and to be honest with you, I would even see that being challenged. So we'll see what happens. Yeah, we'll just see what happens. So we're gonna put a pin on that one right there, because that's just to be determined. All right, next question. I thought this was hilarious. I answered this one very simply. What if the employee has the antibodies? Do they still need to be required to take the vaccination? You know what? There's two things that I'm not. I'm not an attorney and I'm not a physician. So they would need to ask a physician on that, because who know, or excuse me, an employment attorney, because we don't even know what's in the executive, like really fully to the extent of the executive order. And just because somebody has antibodies doesn't necessarily mean anything.
No, but I will tell you, this has nothing to do with US law, but I sit over here in Switzerland and they are counting a positive COVID test as an exemption for 6 months after your positive diagnosis. So
That's interesting.
precedent in Europe, the EU, I think all of them are doing that. So if you're not vaccinated and you want to come to Europe and you've had COVID, you come within the 6-month time period, because you can get an exemption during that 6-month time period. Otherwise, we're not letting you in.
Right. So it was quickly followed up by another question. Would an aortic aneurysm be considered a reason to not take the vaccine? Again, I'm not a physician. I don't know the answer to that. So you need to, so if somebody asks those questions, or if you got something, talk to the employee, go through the interactive process, let the physician make the determination.
And hopefully when the Department of Labor issues their guidelines through OSHA, it will say clearly one way or the other with that. But right now we don't have that.
Yeah. All right. Next question. And then we got one more after that. As a federal contractor, should our company establish our own requirements, or do we wait for the government to disclose their requirements and use those? You know what? Hold off until you know exactly what's going on.
The only thing I would say against that is that if you have a high percentage of people who you know are not vaccinated, and you're going to end up having to do weekly testing if this goes into effect, I'd start working on my plan for tracking that now.
Right, but this is for federal contractors, which there's
For federal
already a
contractors.
mandate out there. This is specific to federal contractors.
Okay, for
Yes.
federal contractors, that's already
Yeah.
out there. Wait till
Right.
you get the guidelines.
That's what I'm
But
saying.
for everybody else, if you've got a lot of employees, I mean, if you have 3 employees, it's not going to be a difficult thing to track. But let's say you're Walmart, who of course Walmart executives are listening to this definitely and following our advice, as well they should be. They've got 1 million employees in the US, or half of them are probably not vaccinated, because half of the country isn't vaccinated. How are you going to track 500,000 COVID tests a week? Work that out now. They need to start on it now. And as I said, I don't think this will go into effect. I don't,
Yeah.
but there are employment attorneys out there who say that it will.
It's anyone's guess at this point.
And for reasons that I don't understand, I'm not a federal
We're not
judge.
doctors, we're not
I'm
attorneys,
a
and we're
federal
not
judge.
judges. So this works out great. All right. Last
know.
question.
Dang it.
If the employee requests working remotely, can this be allowed without being penalized by the employer? Look, here's the thing. If you permit your employee to work from home, there's nothing out there that penalizes you as an employee, regardless if you require them to come in and work or whether they stay home.
Right. But the problem with this executive order is that there is no exemption for remote workers. That's going to fail for sure. That's me with my crystal ball. That's failing for sure.
I have the same one, by the way.
We have the same crystal ball. But yeah. And the thing is that I got into an argument with some employment lawyers the other day. And even though they're employment lawyers, I still think I'm right. They were arguing that people who ask for a religious or medical exemption, that you can just suspend them without pay for their accommodation. And I was like, I don't think that's going to fly in court. I really don't, because a jury is going to say, well, they worked just fine for the year before, the 18 months before vaccines were mandatory. now you're saying that they can't work, like that you can't make an accommodation. I don't think that's going to fly. My employment lawyer friends said they think that will, and that's what they're advising their clients. Take that for what you will.
Yep.
I said, if I'm on a jury, I'm not buying it. They said, we'll be sure to exclude you from our jury pool.
All right. So that is what we got for you guys today.